Hello, I'm Jim Miller. I'm here with Andy Overton and Terrence Moore. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. Brooklyn voters report mislabeled absentee ballots. It's a major problem. Is it a major problem, Andy?
Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, I think we've all had printing problems. I mean, from everything from wedding invitations to agendas, but here's the deal. I don't necessarily think that it's, label of fraud. I think there was a printing error. I think they caught it, they're gonna reprint them, and it's gonna be okay. I'm glad they caught it now. But yeah, it could be a problem, but let's fix it before the election.
Okay. Terrence?
It's a problem because it's a PR nightmare. We've seen everything. We've heard about the ballots and the possible fraud about mail-in ballots, and this is just a kind of feather in the hat of the possibility of fraud happening. And as like Andy said, printing problems happen in everything that gets distributed in mass production. It always happens. It was bound to happen. The magnifying glass is happening just because it also happened in New York City, which is a big viewer from a media base as well to kind of make their point.
Is anybody as surprised as I am that this hasn't had more play in the media? I mean, on both sides, whether it's Fox News or CNN, I've just not seen that much of this story.
And there's not really a story. It's a printing error. I mean,
well, I get that, but this is an opportunity for those that would say that mail-in ballots are a bad thing to say, see?
Listen, just
right
wait
there.
until after the election, and then we'll point back to the story and say, see, I told you this was happening, and here's the result. Wait on that. Wait on that for about 6 weeks, and then we'll have that conversation.
Okay, so
again.
this is the and we talk about October surprises in elections. This will be the post-election November surprise.
It is in
that
somebody's
what you're
back pocket
suggesting?
right now.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. What else could go wrong with mail-in ballots? What are the options? Where do we see the risk?
It's the U.S. mail. Unfortunately, we've been seeing it throughout COVID right now. Look at mail delays that are actually happening. There's a huge division that investigates mail fraud actually from people who steal mail. Coming from New York City in large buildings, there's times when stacks of mail are just left outside of mailboxes. Things like that happen. So there is a possibility that there can be mail that's mishandled or tampered with. But we're talking about millions of pieces of mail. I just think the percentage of impact will be minuscule.
Okay. Andy?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that the issue here is to fix the system in which we deliver the mail, not to cancel the opportunity to vote by mail. And I think that, again, if we just say, we're not going to vote by mail, everything is horrible, we're not really addressing the hardcore situation, and that's to be able to have enough resources to get the mail right. Because it's not just about ballots, it's about medications and tax returns and checks and money and other resources that are sent every day. It's not just about Amazon, it's about the things that people need to have in order to live. So if this brings to light the fact that we need just a little bit better system of how we sort our mail and get our mail and deliver our mail, so be it. So this is just a tip of an iceberg of a bigger issue. Let's fix the bigger issue.
So what is the potential that I order my Maryland ballot, right? Because I can do that.
Okay.
And then I just go vote in person as well. Because there's got to be some kind of opportunity if I ordered a mail-in ballot and then decide to go vote in person. I'm imagining they'll let me do that.
You can vote once, whether it's by ballot.
Oh, I get that. You're supposed to vote once.
Yeah, so whether you bring your ballot to a drop-off location, whether you put it back in the mail, or whether you bring that ballot with you in order to go vote in person, you still only vote once. You can order your ballot and then still arrive. And so, for instance, if you order your ballot and you make a mistake on that ballot, your vote doesn't no longer count. Don't turn it in. Go vote yourself. Go order another ballot. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So that can happen all the time. The point is, one person, one vote, no matter how that works.
I get it.
No matter what the delivery system is.
All right.
And mailing voting is not new. It's amazing that we can. This has been a process for years, and we're looking at it as all these things that can go wrong with it. Absolutely, things can go wrong, but they could have went wrong 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, 2 years ago. There's always been that opportunity. And we got to look at as well too. Maybe we shouldn't have used private vendors in New York City as well, and have a no bid contest where they didn't compete against anybody else as well. So maybe we look into that process a little bit more. And there's a lot of infighting in this specific problem as well between the mayor and the Board of Elections as they're kind of in contention over the last couple of years. So I think this made the paper and this became a bigger story because it has a little bit of more background and it had some teeth because of de Blasio's issue that he had with the Board of Elections.
There you go.
So I would agree that mail-in ballot has been around for a long time. Absentee ballot has been around for a long time. But I don't think it's been around at this level. We're now talking about it representing potentially a majority of votes rather than a minority of votes. Is that accurate?
Sure, but that's a problem, right? Colorado's been doing this for like 10 years or something, and I might be wrong on that stat. Don't at me. So I think my point is, though, is that other states have gotten that right. Why can't we replicate those processes? The reason we don't, I think the fact that we don't, or many states don't have mail-in voting is a problem. We should be replicating. We should be making it easier for folks to vote once. And making sure that process works. And if other states can do it, why can't everybody else?
And from your perspective, you don't see any additional opportunity for fraud with mail-in versus whatever everybody else
Fraud
did.
has been like 0.03% or something absolutely low and ridiculous. Until you prove otherwise from what we've been doing so far, no, I don't. If we get the process right, and we have states who have gotten the process right, let's duplicate that. Let's not recreate the wheel 50 times over. Let's duplicate what works.
Okay. So I get my ballot, I vote, but then I go into the election headquarters and I say, oh, I never got my ballot. It never came in the mail. What happens?
You keep looking over here. I like this conversation. Poor Terrence. I think what happens is at some point,
It's Pickle and Andy night.
and that's
just so
fine.
you
Pick
know.
on me all you want. But I think at some point that information crosses, right? You still have to certify the election results.
Okay.
And just like if you try to get back in line and vote again, at some point a system's going to say, no, you've been here already. This has already happened. Now, you have a pretty common name, right?
Right.
So we have to make sure that we line that up with who you really are. And there is a process in place to do that. Again, voter fraud is so incredibly low in the places that do use mail-in votes. I don't see how we can't do this in other states. I don't know the full process, but it's working right now.
All right. I'll look at you, Terrence, because she just accused me of picking on her. What are your thoughts? Is that a viable opportunity for fraud? Because guess what? When I go to vote at the polls, how are they going to know? Even if they figure out, hey, Miller voted twice, how are they going to figure out what they should cancel out of my vote?
I don't know the exact process, but I hope there's some due diligence in the process that will validate some of that information. And there's electronic fraud. There's fraud that can happen in any means of the process that we have in place. Actually, technology is more susceptible to fraud than paper ballots actually are susceptible to fraud. So we got to take that into consideration. So there's always some opportunity out there for something to be hacked or something to be stolen. So it's out there. My thing is, and I get it, and I understand the fear, but pushing fear into the community right now is keeping people away from voting. And that's the last thing we want to do right now as well. So we want more people to vote. And on paper ballot, send a carrier pigeon, I don't care. If they can get out and vote, it'd be great right now. But talking about the fraud and putting fear into people, they're just going to toss these paper ballots away, or they're just not going to show up to the polls. I know we don't want people counted twice, but we just want people out there, period, voting right now at this point in time. So I hope there's a due diligence. And it's also an opportunity to do a review of our election board right now. These are processes that we should have been looking at years ago. We shouldn't be at this point knowing how advanced technology is coming, that something like this may happen. So I think, we stayed stagnant and complacent that the system we had in place was working so well. This, again, unfortunately, COVID has showed us that we weren't proactive enough to take care of some of the core principles of our democracy.
It is a bit of a challenge to say, Andy, you have the right to vote however you want, and you have the right not to tell anybody how you voted. But by the same token, say, well, guess what? We need to track, now that we have this kind of hybrid system, especially in Maryland. Maryland is unique. Would you agree? But we have to track.
Sure.
And even before this happened, I remember when I went in to get my ballot, I would give them my name, and I would give them my address, and they would give me a ballot that had a number on it, I think. So, I mean, there was some barcode on it or something, so one would expect they could be able to track that, and you had a little card that they registered to your name, and then you would put that card in. Is that not potential for fraud?
Again, there is potential for fraud. I won't debate there's potential for fraud. Like I said, but it's everywhere. It's in anything, and it's like anything. We have to mitigate the risk. You know, how much risk is really associated? How much fraud? If it's 10 out of 8 million ballots, then you know I'm good with that. You know, it's unfortunate. I would love zero risk, but there's nothing in life without risks. You know, anything where we're collecting and having individual and having man's hands on it, we are fallible no matter what. So we already bake in risk in how we collect election data right now that we get stuff wrong. We've seen it in different states before when we had to recount ballots. We don't have a ballot recounting process because we get it perfect every time. You know, so there's always risk in what we do, and it's always been in our system. What I like to see is more of some consistency in a unified process from state to state. Every state doing something different and using different systems is really not how we should be doing things.
The hybrid model that Maryland has adopted, what are your thoughts on that?
The best thing about a hybrid model, it offers a greater opportunity. It's more inclusive of people to actually vote in the system, and that's what I'm for. So the proponent for that is yes, I like the hybrid model because it gives everybody an opportunity, and it gives options to actually get out and vote and remove at least maybe one of the excuses that somebody may have for why they didn't vote.
All right. What about you?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, if we can allow more people and make it easier for people to vote, you don't have to be standing in line for 18 hours to cast a vote if it is just as secure as putting your vote in the mail, as dropping it off at a ballot box, as voting and requesting your vote online. So if we can secure that down to a measurable and allowable risk, well, then that hybrid model is the best, because it allows people to remove the barriers in order for them to do their due diligence and vote in their country. I don't get the argument that says if you can stand in line in Walmart, you can stand in line in a voting on election day. You could, but why do I have to? Why do I have to do that? Why can't I simply drop my ballot off? Why can't I put it in the mail if the risk is low and if we know that it is safe? What's the difference? I don't understand it.
All right, last comments?
And we have a new risk this year. Standing in line comes with a risk this year. You know, so we gotta calculate that risk as well. Yeah,
that's a great point. Why do I have to risk my life in order to vote in my own democracy? That sounds ludicrous to me.
Yeah, well, and again, we know that there's a certain population, a lot larger than I care to think about, that don't vote. Mm-hmm. And you put any impediment in their way, and that's their excuse to, well, I'm not going to vote.
Okay.
All right, up next, new ways to get suspended from school in this COVID environment. We'll have that story when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. So I want you to picture this. You're a 9-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. You're sitting in your room at your home doing your virtual classroom, and suddenly the teacher sees in your room a BB gun. What happens to you?
Are you asking me what happens to me?
Yes.
In what I mean, the teacher could report you, and I know what the story is about, obviously, but I mean, oh, Jim. This boy apparently picked it up because his brother tripped over it.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And he picked it up and he put it aside and he sat back down.
And to give context, so it's a BB gun.
It is a BB gun.
It was in the boy's room.
It was.
His brother apparently tripped over it. He picked it up. Teacher saw it sitting somewhere, or I couldn't get whether it was in his possession at that point or sitting somewhere, and they were going to expel him. Mm-hmm. And then they settled on just suspending him for however many days or weeks.
Yep, for flashing a gun in a classroom. And the crazy thing is, and here's what I'll say, is that teacher has no idea what kind of gun that is, right? He doesn't know if it's an airsoft gun, if it's something that could really hurt someone. So I think the reporting structure is perfectly fine. I would have done the same thing. There's a weapon in the back of this 9-year-old's house. I might have said something. But what happens after that? The kid clearly, I mean clearly, has absolutely no indication of what he's going to do with it other than to put it away. And we don't have any rules, regulations, and procedures really about online learning. We are in other people's homes. So what is happening in the back of that? How do you hold a 9-year-old responsible for what's happening in the background? He didn't bring it on school grounds. It's in his own house. And so I'm a little blown away by this at all whatsoever. I think the discrepancy here is that, they nailed a kid for what they thought was the right thing to do. He's not a mass killer. He's not a mass shooter. He's picking it up so his brother doesn't trip over it. Somebody should have used a little bit more discretion about how to deal with the situation. Gun safety's one.
Terrence.
They overreacted. Just plainly overreacted. It would have been you can't bring a knife to school either, but we got kids sitting at kitchen tables every day doing their work, right? So the kid had the gun, he picked it up, he off the floor, was out of sight the whole time. He didn't brandish it, he didn't wave it, he picked it up and sat it on a chair.
Right.
The teacher didn't even see him pick it up, she just seen it sitting on a chair. And when she sat on the chair, she tried to communicate to him, disconnected him. He got disconnected actually because of poor service, and then she tried to contact him and couldn't get in contact with the family. Now let's talk about some of those problems right there. So if something was happening to that child, it took almost forever for her to get in contact with that kid's family, all right? The kid had poor internet service and couldn't get in touch with its teacher and dropped, and something major could have happened. If you were really alarmed about the health and safety of a child, do something about that. So expelling a kid and then dropping it down to a suspension for a policy that's based on being on school premise. So you're saying that the child's home has now become school premises because they're using a piece of technology. If that's the case, that changes all our laws. Whenever that changes all our laws completely. So I think it was overreaction to kind of shift liability because they didn't know how to react. Right now, we're in unknown territory right now. They didn't want another parent or another kid to actually see it, say something about it, and then have to deal with it later. So they took the strongest approach possible so they can eventually back it down. But they completely overreacted, and they need to look at their policies.
And this kid suffers in the interim.
Yeah, 100%. And I really hope that this is a case of overreaction and it is then dealt with appropriately.
But here's the problem. And this is where we're going to maybe disagree.
All right.
Isn't that what we do today in our culture, overreact?
Not always. I mean, I'm not going to put the overreaction button on everything and everyone. Sometimes we underreact. Sometimes we don't react at all, right?
We overreact a lot.
Okay.
In my view, we overreact a lot. And I think this is just another good example of and this, in my mind, is gross overreaction. I mean, this is not just, garden variety overreaction. If we were going to overreact, let's just hit it right out of the park,
Well,
right?
let's talk about the education, right? If this was, in my mind, what should have happened is that teachers should have contacted, because we don't know what's really laying next to this kid, right? We should be addressing the internet problems. And even if an officer went out there, sit the kid down, talk about what should and shouldn't be happening, see what kind of subjects he's interested in school, don't expel him, find out what the intent is, and educate this kid. Educate him on what hunter safety is. Educate him on why maybe a BB gun in your room is not the best thing when you're online, but make it better. All we've done so far is taken a kid who was doing his studies and giving him a stigma from here on out.
Absolutely.
Right? And so he now has to fight that for the next, 7, 8, 9 decades. And I think that is ridiculous. And he's owed not only an apology, but this needs to be reversed. He needs to get back into class. He needs to start learning again and live his productive life.
And they need to address the trauma, like you said,
100%.
because there's trauma that comes with this incident right now for this child, of how how it relates. And I go back to what I said before about how they tried to contact. They couldn't contact the parents, so they went to his emergency contact and his grandfather. Not once did someone call 911. Not once did someone send a police officer to a 9-year-old house who they thought had a gun.
Although I will say, maybe that was a good decision. That's all I'm going to leave it
It could have been, but
maybe that was a good decision.
But it could have been a bad decision had the opposite been true.
Yeah, sure.
But the point is, the kid's in his house.
The kid's in his house.
Right.
And he did the responsible thing. He picked up something that was hurting his younger brother by tripping over it, and he got back into class.
Right.
I'm not sure why this is even a story.
Well, yeah.
Well, this is a story because we're unprepared.
100%.
We didn't look at the policies. We're not looking at procedures of how distance learning. We overreacted to the education system of how we're going to address this, and we missed some key points. You know, the safety of our children. Like, it's just glaring, and we think about all the mass shootings that we had in our schools over the years, and you would think, you know, we will work our way from the safety of our children and education down until outside of just the comfort or the availability. So there's so many things for us to consider around this distance learning that we really have to kind of break the education system down to the foundation and build it back up. And we can't just, you know, put Band-Aids and tape it together with glue and try to make it work and think we're going to educate our children, because we have incidents like this that could cause trauma to a kid. And again, there's no policy created. Every school around probably looked at this and said, this could have been us, easily.
If you have a high school student, this was a 9-year-old, right? What is that? 4th grader?
Sure. I don't
Something
have
like
kids.
that?
Yeah,
Third-
sounds
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Elementary school. We'll go with
Elementary
that.
school. So you have a high school student that has a potentially inappropriate poster hanging on the wall of his bedroom,
Sure.
directly behind the desks that he uses or she uses to connect into classroom. What's the response to that?
Well, the response is policies. And you know, I work for an organization where that's what we did. We send our employees home. And part of sending our employees home, we had policies of how they needed to keep their room, what could be on camera, what can be in that room, what can be access to their computer. They had to have a private area where no one can even come into for security and confidentiality. And we also had the ability to do audits in that room and make sure that everything was taken care of. It's a lot that goes into sending employees home, let alone sending children home into this environment. So you have to put some kind of policies in place of what that looks like. And so kids know, you know, when you look at your screen, you have to take in consideration what's in your background. But we haven't put these policies in place, so you can't be held to expectations that weren't made clear to you.
And policies are great, but action is also important. In that case of what you just suggested, Jim, what we need to do is sit down and talk to the kid about why maybe that's not the most appropriate poster in the back, and that person can't come into the classroom because of that. Find a different area. And we can go into all day long about what that means for First Amendment rights and freedom of speech. Like, I get that. But what we don't do is say, you're suspended, you're expelled, but we'll reduce it down to a suspension and literally bring that trauma to that child. That's what we don't do. We have communication, we have comments, we sit down and we counsel. We try and make people better. We try and mediate. We don't jump right away and say, you're out. There's no reason for that. For the 9-year-old, for your instance, for that high school kid, we sit down, we counsel, I don't know, and we educate, because that's what educators do.
So Terrence, one of the other things that was published recently was one of the school districts had decided that while the kids were in school, the parents couldn't be in the room. The parents could not listen to the lesson. Some on one side of the political aisle said, well, that's just because we're trying to indoctrinate them into one political leaning or the other. Others had other additional conspiracy theories about why it was occurring. What is your feeling on that?
My feeling is that I don't think that's right. You know, again, you're in your own house. You know, your child may be struggling right now. They need assistance. We see that teachers are struggling themselves to try to handle 15, 20, 30 kids on these, distance learning as well. And the parents are their only ally, or adult in that room, or somebody, guardian is their only ally to keep that child focused and attentive in that room. Now, same thing, you know, in classrooms, parents just can't come into classrooms and sit with their kids all the time without some permission, but it's allowed, you know, under certain circumstances. So I don't understand why, you know, excluding them out of the room does any good to the child's learning experience.
Andy?
Let's just also talk about the classism here, right? Some people only live in one room. So what?
Yeah, that's a good
They're going to
point.
have to take their family and go downstairs to the next block. It's ridiculous. We have to start thinking that not every child has more than one room, and sometimes there are many children in one room learning, but they're in school. So if we can't start having, if we cannot have these conversations about what life in online learning looks like, we're not only making bad policy, we're not making any policy. And there's no way I'm telling a parent, you know what, you can't be in the same room as your child as your child is learning, and that room could be the kitchen. So what? You can never make dinner? You can't make lunch? Your baby is screaming? It is a blanketed rule that doesn't apply to everybody. It applies to this middle of America who has more than one room in their house, who has the opportunity to come in and out as they please. And I think it's a very classist policy and problem. Let's not blanket it to everybody.
Good point. All right, up next, confidence is high, consumer confidence, that is. We'll talk about that after the break. Stay with us. U.S. consumer confidence posted a better than expected gain in September. It's still lower than the levels reached pre-COVID, but it's a pretty significant increase. Andy, what say you?
You know, I have a hard time in the pandemic of trying to figure out what's going to happen tomorrow, much less 3 months from now. We know that some of the seasonal jobs are coming and going. I think that's going to play into this index. And if anybody can say, definitively, this is what this means and where it's going, they're lying. There's no way we can predict this. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, and until we get through whatever this pandemic response is going to be, I'm not sure that, yes, this is the fact, this is what's happening, but I can't exactly apply it to what's really happening in like real life, because I don't even know what real life is in this pandemic. I have no idea how this is going to affect our lives tomorrow, much less 6 months from now.
Terrence?
I think people are reacting to what they've been told. You know, 6 months from now, a vaccine is going to be here. So people are optimistic that things are going to change. A vaccine is going to be here. They also have phase gaze. We keep phasing people up and through a process which has the mindset that things are getting better. And so you start to buy into that as well. And then you come into the month of September and everybody's shopping, of course, because everyone shops in September because kids go back to school. Kids at one point weren't going to school. Now they're going back to school. So people rush out. They're doing some shopping. We're opening up restaurants. So the perception is, it looks like that. But we also got to look at who are they asking?
Yeah.
You know, we talked about, at one point in time in a previous show about, the wealthier jobs coming back fairly quickly, those who have the disposable income. So they may have more of an optimistic look at what's going to happen in 6 months. But there's a lot of people still sitting on their couch and still waiting for their jobs to come back, if their jobs come back. And I'm sure their confidence isn't as high.
Well, I think the key term, or I think the key word you said there, in my opinion, is if their jobs come back. Because I don't think, hopefully they'll get employment, but as what? Mm-hmm. I look at some of my favorite restaurants and hear when I visit them that their staff is reduced by a third, or by 2/3. They have a third of the staff they once had. And I see I think you're right. I think saving and accepting, the fast food drive-through franchises that were able to weather the storm and the very large corporations, I think a lot of these small mom and pops are going to be the ones that are hardest hit by all of this. The other thing that I wonder, and again, I think we've talked about this in a previous show, but I wonder if at some level by infusing all this cash, we're not creating a false sense of security that people are reacting to. And I wonder, quite frankly, if there's, aside from what I hope is a sincere intention to help people out, I wonder if there's not some political posturing there to, if something's going to happen, let's wait till after the election for it to happen.
We see it with small businesses. Businesses, the airlines, they're sitting there waiting with bated breath for this stimulus package to come across.
The next one.
The next one, yeah. Right? And we even see the consumers. I don't think I open social media or any browser without saying, when is your next stimulus check coming? And it's creating this anticipation that keeps people in this positive manner. Yes, it is. It's strategic marketing to keep people with a positive and optimistic outlook as we come into this election election season. So absolutely, I believe there's some posturing involved in it.
But what I think this is showing us is that we are getting somewhat used to living in this new normal, right?
We are.
We're figuring out how to pick up our groceries. We're figuring out how to work out in our home gyms. We're figuring out how much unemployment will take us into the next month if we get it. And so I think what this says is people are starting to let go a little bit of their money in order to help support the small businesses, in order to help feel as though they're living back in a normal life. What this doesn't say is that if all things remain equal, if this is the way that our life is going to be and we don't hit another spike, we don't close down our economy again, then I can see this as a predictor. But we kind of think that's not going to happen, right? We've got flu season around the corner. We don't really know when the vaccine is going to hit and when it's going to be widely available. And I think at some point, some areas could spike again. And then this consumer index is going to fluctuate, which I think is why it's so difficult to use it as a predictor of what's going to come up, because we don't know what life is going to be like in 6 months.
What I heard you say that I'm going to add on to is the fact that people are getting used to living in this new environment, and maybe they realize now. I mean, before when it first started, what did we go out and buy? Well, I didn't, but what did most people go out and buy? Toilet paper, right? So now we're looking further into the house. I don't know if you've tried to get any exercise equipment online.
I can't buy 20-pound dumbbells for under $150, which I refuse to pay for.
Right. You can't. You're absolutely right.
Right.
You can't buy treadmills. You can't buy ellipticals. You
can't buy pools.
Yeah.
Baffling.
Yeah. So maybe people, not maybe, people are, and I think that's evidenced by what we see happening at Lowe's and Home Depot. People are investing in their homes because they're realizing that at least for the foreseeable future, they're going to have to spend a lot more time there.
Sure.
And is it fair to say that that might be the reason, or part of the reason, for this consumer confidence hike? They're saying, wait a minute, phase 2 is coming on. We may be back in the trenches again. I'm gonna put the basement theater room together.
What I hear you say is that my giant Costco run a few months ago, between just my girlfriend and I spending $400 on food, helped this increase. I hear you. But again, it's to my point, right? If all things remain the same and we start living this new normal and things don't spike or dip, then we may be able to use this as a predictor. But if it doesn't, and more than likely it won't, we're going to go up and down. Economies are going to be weird about it. When we have news about the vaccine, if we get one and when we get one, I think things are going to dip. I think my whole point is, while this is a good explanation of maybe how we got here, I'm not sure this is a great stat to say this is where we're going to be in December, in January, and even in March and April, spring of next year.
Yeah. Is it a spike or is it a trend?
That's exactly it.
And I think it's a spike because we've seen coronavirus, from an outbreak standpoint, and people who've tested positive. This is one of the highest months we've seen so far. So we're going up, and people are coming out more. In response to 6 months ago, people were running in when we seen these kind of numbers. Right. So I think, to Andy's point, people are getting used to it, and people are getting more confident to be out in the public, taking the right precautions where they go and who they're being exposed to. Think about the influx of people who went on vacations in late August, right before the school year began. Added to some of this influx of money that was actually being spent as well. And I think with some bottleneck of spending as well, I think a lot of people held on to their money for some large purchases like automobiles. We've seen the car lots were kind of overflowing because why would I buy a car if I can't drive it anywhere? And so now you're coming out in this time of the year, so you're going out and you're making larger purchases. So I'm more concerned that we're seeing a spike that's giving people confidence, and it's not the trend.
Interesting. Well, it is a spike that potentially could have an impact on the election. Would you agree?
I mean, sure. I mean, what isn't an impact on the election at this point? We're hyper aware, we're hypersensitive, we're hyper intuitive. We dig deeper into things than we have before. So sure, this will be an impact on the election.
But at the end of the day, and I think it was President Clinton that his campaign person came up with, it's the economy, stupid. And the reality is, I think that is going to, if the economy is good, you heard it here first, Donald Trump is going to be hard to beat. Like it, don't like it. That's an opinion.
We have short-term memories, and unfortunately, the 3 months before the election are the power months.
Yeah.
Whatever happens within those months is what's sticking people in voters' minds. Unfortunately, they forget about how fearful and how scared they were, the bad decisions that were made months before, and it's all about the last 3 months. What's in it right now, in the moment, that microwave mentality, and that goes into the voter booth with a lot of voters. Not saying all voters, but a lot of voters have that mentality.
I don't know, Terrence. We have 200,000 people dead, and I think that kind of statistic alone, when you sit down to Thanksgiving, when you sit down for a dinner and you find out that Grandpa isn't with you, I think that is going to stick with a lot more votors than the last 3 months.
But
I think this time's a little bit different with that.
I don't think that there's a majority of the population that's going to attribute that wholly and solely to the administration.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you might be right. I don't have a crystal ball.
Well, it doesn't have to be everybody. It just has to be most people. That's all that is, right? 50% plus one.
Yeah.
So you're right.
50% of voters plus one.
Right. of people who vote plus one.
Yeah,
right.
which is probably what. Not.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Not,
throw in a statistic. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. That's all the time we have for that. Coming up next, Fast Five. Stay tuned. We've got some great topics on that one. Welcome to Fast Five, where our three panelists talk about 5 topics in 7 short minutes. Let's get started. Williamsport is now officially a Main Street, Maryland community. Governor Larry Hogan announced that last Friday. Hagerstown, I believe, is a Main Street community. What does that mean?
It means that we're doing good work in a small town that is trying to improve quality of life, business aspects, and of course, investing in their main street. They're trying to bring business to people and people to business. And if that's the case, and when that's the case, I can't see how that's a bad thing. I think it's a great grant.
Okay.
Yeah, it's access to funding. It brings the attention to a community that's in a position of development. It brings developers in. It recruits outside businesses into that community as well, because it has the support of government funding that's going to be coming in. So I think it's a great opportunity. What it is scary for Hagerstown, because that's competition. And I think we overlook what's happening in Williamsport right now. So we got to keep a watchful eye on what's going on over there.
Great point.
Williamsport, in my opinion, and of course they've got this wonderful asset, the C&O Canal, but you look over the last 10 or so years with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, building back up the slack water after after it was washed away or whatever happened. And some of the other things, and now the C&O Canal National Headquarters, rewatering the canal there. And the canal got a lot of traffic. I would go down there to take my son down before he would drive for him to run with his buddies. And there was always a lot of traffic down there. And there's now even more traffic down there. And then, you put the C&O Canal National Headquarters. Williamsport's got it going on.
Yeah, when you invest
and I say
in
that
your
as a
city.
Proud Williamsportonian. I am a river rat.
Are you?
I am, yes indeed. I don't live in the town. I don't live in the town, but I have a Williamsport mailing address.
Good.
So talk to me about the funding. What do we know about that? What is the real impact of that?
Well,
do we know?
Don't know exactly dollars and cents, especially right now as things are going to be reallocated with what's spending and what's going to be allocated from a budget standpoint for next year. But it's an opportunity. It's grant opportunity. It's money that can be applied for. Something I know that Hagerstown ran into is who's responsible for that money. Who spends the money and how is that money spent? That's when strategic planning comes into place. So whoever's in position to do that, or whatever committee, whatever group, some places use a nonprofit. Some people, it's actually held by the government, local government. I think that makes a big, Frederick actually, I believe they have a nonprofit that partners with their local government and how they spend their money in their downtown and their Main Street area. So that comes into play of how that money is actually spent and how far it goes.
So the employee at Williamsport that's responsible for that is a lady named Catherine Gratton. Catherine has been on the show before. She talks in this article about wanting to see more feet on the street, wanting to see more shops potentially downtown, and just an overall, they start having food truck Fridays, which I think is a great idea. I actually visited one of those a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I think there's some neat things going on in Williamsport.
And Catherine was actually huge in what they did in Waynesboro Main Street as well. So she's familiar with the process. So she's someone who can pick it up and run with it very quickly. But again, a lot of that sounds familiar to Hagerstown.
Yeah.
You know, everything that we've been trying to do, we want to do, wanting more feet in the street, we want more small businesses. That's why I believe that we got some competition. I think Williamsport's going to be nipping at the heels of the city. So
we rarely talk about other than maybe the Supreme Court justice, we don't usually talk about court cases or anything like that. But this one was just so interesting, I had to add it in. Maryland man sentenced to a year in prison for hosting large parties during the pandemic. Is this, well, what is your opinion on this? Andy, we'll start with you.
Here's what happened. The cop said, you can't do this, knock it down. He said, watch me work. And then they came back. And I just feel like when the police tell you this is against the law, we're giving you a break, please break up your party for the good of the health, whether you agree with the law or not, it is what it is. You know, please don't make us come back here and have this conversation again. And when the cops come back and have that conversation and this individual argues with them, then you go to jail. I mean, I think the idea was we gave you a break and here we are. Whether we think that this is a long-term an overreaction for his prison sentence, maybe, possibly, sure. I think there may be better ways to handle it. But the cops did their job. They gave him the break. He ignored it, and now he's locked up.
Yep.
I can't dispute with that. That's absolutely, you know, it could have turned out worse. I think he was given a break. He was given an opportunity. He's putting lives at risk. If you want to put into, you know, the extreme context, he's putting lives at risk. Yeah. Not only lives at risk of people who was in that party, but the community that they were going to return back to at some point in time. And the police officers gave him a warning. You know, what else can you want from that situation other than a thank you officer? Hey guys, let's break up the party. But when you get to this point of just pure rebellion, then you have there's consequences. So,
okay. Do we see a lot more rebellion against the police than maybe what we had seen in the past?
Oh, you took a hard left turn right now. Oh my goodness, we were talking about parties and COVID. I mean, okay, you want to go there in a minute and a half? Sure. But, you know, like John Lewis said, you get in trouble, good trouble. This isn't good trouble. This isn't standing up for the rights of other people. Even though
I'm not even talking about that.
I'm with you. I have a point, I promise. But this man is claiming that he's standing up because he has the right to do this. No, he doesn't. We're not fighting segregation. We're not fighting homophobia. We're fighting the right to party, and that's ridiculous. So yes, you can rebel against the police or against laws in a way that is good trouble. Thank you, John Lewis. This ain't it.
There was a song when I was growing up that told us all, you got to fight.
For your right.
For your right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Clearly, this gentleman is ready to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. That said. All right, next one, and this one is just scratch my head. This is the TFS, WTF, What the FlipSide segment. Police in Vietnam do a raid, and they found more than 300,000 used condoms being packaged for resale. Terrence, what say you?
Yeah, what say you, Terrence?
You know, I'm all for recycling, right? I'm all for recycling, but there needs to be a hard line drawn in the sand. And this is unsafe.
No pun intended.
Right. You know, this is unsafe, unsanitary, and I can't see why there's any benefit to doing this. I don't even know what the return on the investment of collecting used condoms.
Well, I was going to say, I would think the processing charges, no pun intended, would be more than what the potential return on investment would be.
So the serious side of me says this is a major health issue. Obviously, we're putting lives at risk, not just for unwanted pregnancies, but STD. I mean, yes. The not so serious side of me says, Who signs up for that job to clean a dirty condom so that you can get into a warehouse and then repackage them and put them back out again? Who says that's a good thing? Why didn't someone stand up and say, you know, I'm just thinking, I don't think this is right, and there's got to be a better job out there for me. I think my job is tough sometimes. I'm not repackaging and cleaning used condoms, so I'm good in my life. I read this story and I said, where did you find these facts?
Yeah.
Here we are.
Well, here we are. And yeah, my abilities to search out just crazy news stories is evidenced by this particular one.
Incredible.
It's a
Absolutely
gift.
Incredible.
It's a gift.
It is a gift. It is a gift. All right. Maryland was awarded additional CARES Act funding to support small businesses impacted by coronavirus. Here's my big concern with that. CARES Act funding is great, but don't we have to spend all this by December 31st? I mean, we got 3 months.
I can spend $1.6 million in 3 months without a problem. I can not even
But
bat an eye.
can you spend it on something that's actually going to put us back on the right track? I mean, anybody can spend it.
Well, jobs right now. We're getting into the holiday season. We're talking about spending going up. I think we can bring a lot more people into seasonal work and pay those salaries of those individuals through the holiday season, which would be great because then hopefully they can have a good holiday season for themselves as well. So I think that's where most of the money is going to go for the CARES Act, is to kind of put people back on salary and get them back to working for at least some kind of temporary jobs for the next 3 months.
So we're going to artificially inflate the economy again for another 3 months.
Yes.
So even beyond the election, we're going to continue to do this.
Yeah, and here's what you're balancing is whether we're going to keep people afloat and stay in their houses and get jobs and make sure they can work, or we're going to inflate the economy. And right now, I want people to live and be healthy. I want folks to be able to have access to I want folks to go back to work in a way that is safe. I want PPE for people. I want, people who can't afford their light bill because they lost their job to be able to afford their light bill. I want their kids to go to school. I can spend $1.6 million in about 3 weeks and help people out here. And yeah.
It's actually 3.4 million.
Oh, sorry, 3.4 million? All right, thanks.
But I get your point, and I will, to your point, or to one of your earlier points, I will tell you, and I always pay my bills online wherever possible. And when I went in to pay my electric bill last week, I noticed there was a notice on there that said, hey, by the way, we're restarting disconnections
that's right.
at some point. Which I think the state apparently is now fighting with them about. But regardless, I mean, everybody's saying, wait a minute, okay, it's time to get back to normalcy and getting cash coming in as well. I also don't see, when I go in to pay my mortgage and my car payment, I don't see those notices, need help, call us here. I don't see those as much anymore. So,
and it may not be as easy to spend that money either, because a lot of businesses won't apply for the money, because we've seen that as already. We don't know if we can have to pay back the money we got in the summertime, during PPP, and the banks are still on hold on whether some of that's going to be forgiven. Was it going to be forgiven up to $150,000? So I think there's some fear that's there, and there was a lot of businesses that needed the money that didn't apply for the money because there was still some confusion around there. So I don't think it's going to be a big cash grab for everybody running after that money either. So I think it's going to be strategically spent, and some key jobs may be coming back with the money.
All right, last topic. If your name is Orlando, it's a good couple of weeks for you, because an airline is offering free flights to Orlando for people whose first or last name are, guess what? Orlando. Terrence, what say you? What's the story, by the way? What did I miss in that story? Who's the airline?
Frontier Airlines.
Frontier, which I've heard of, actually.
Right now it's, you play the odds, right? They're not losing any money here. I think this is a great marketing ploy. They probably get 3 Orlandos. If that, it may be 3 Orlandos
yeah,
in the
bet
whole.
Somebody did that research before they put this out there, right?
Right. I'm sure they ain't offered to gyms, right?
Right.
So I think it's a great marketing ploy, something to put out there. Airlines are hurting right now as well. If you can get, just some kind of buzz going on that's artificially put out there that people can start sharing on social media, where you don't have to put a bunch of marketing dollars into it, so be it. Just throw something gimmicky out there on the internet and see what bites.
Yeah.
So if the average flight is like what, $250 to Orlando, say from the East Coast someplace, not from California, and you don't have to buy one of them, then they'll probably buy the other ticket and have somebody go with Orlando. So in a way, they're filling seats.
Yeah. And by the way,
they're
that second
spending
ticket's
money.
now twice the price.
And that could be too. I'm sure they're going to recoup it. But I did a quick Google search. This is not at all academic. And the name Orlando, at least the first name, is like 734th on the top 1,000 names. I think they're doing okay. It's not number one. It's not number two. It's, it's 3/4 of the way down there. But here's my question, and this is like the funny side of things. What about middle names? Don't they matter? It's only first or last. What if your middle name is Orlando?
Yeah.
All
I fight
names
that.
matter.
I like that. That's a good one.
Only if you're named Orlando.
Exactly.
Well, and the other thing that occurred to me, and to your point of it being not such a popular name, but the other issue is you've got to be in a city that's serviced by this airport, because if you're in Timbuktu and they fly out of somewhere 1,000 miles, I'm assuming it's your responsibility to get the 1,000 miles to where their nearest service center is, and then they'll give you a free flight to Orlando.
That's probably it.
So
First, you got to find Orlando to find out about this offer, right?
Right.
Because you got 5 days from the day this came out to put an application in through a 7-day flight window.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think this airline does fly out of one of our regional carriers, whether it's BWI, Dulles, Reagan, or Pittsburgh.
Sure.
But
sounds logical.
Yeah, that sounds logical. But if your name is Orlando, well, guess what? You've got to October 5th to register and claim your free flight. And there is no prior purchase necessary, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay. So we're well over on time here, but I got to ask this question. I intentionally did not put any information in this Fast Five or any other topic about the presidential debate that happened here this week. What I'd like from you, for both candidates, one for each, give me one word to suggest what your thought was of their performance or their presentation. From the debate.
For each candidate.
For each candidate. One for Vice President Biden, one for President Trump.
It's hard to say it in one word.
Yes.
I'm going to cheat a little bit. So I'm going to say from a Vice President Biden, I would say overconfident. And I would say overconfident, and for sitting President Trump, I would say out of touch. So,
all right.
Those be my two kind of descriptors for.
For Vice President Biden, I would say exhausted, and for our current president, I would say terrifying.
Okay. All right. For Vice President Biden, I'm going to say expected, which is in other words, he performed. He was the politician. For President Trump, I'm going to say petulant.
There you have it, folks.
Interesting debate. I couldn't watch the whole thing. All right, that said, that's all the time we have for tonight. We hope you will like us on Facebook. We hope you will follow us on Twitter. We hope you will send your feedback and suggestions to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That's feedback@theflipsidetv.com. Most importantly, join this crazy crew next week for another visit to the Flip Side. Good night.